You ever get a message from the man who left you, asking for a piece of your body? Not a text to say he missed you, not a call to apologize, just a cold, clinical email with a subject line that read, "Request for compatibility screening." At first, I thought it was spam, but then I saw the name, and for a second, just a second, I felt 12 years old again, sitting in that quiet house after he left, wondering what I did wrong, what we did wrong. That email didn't come from a father. It came from a man who hadn't spoken to me in over a decade, a man who built a new family, a new life, and never looked back. And now, suddenly, I was useful. Not as a daughter, but as a donor. He needed a kidney, and apparently I was his best shot. They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you what happens when that blood gets filtered through betrayal. So yeah, this is the story of how the man who erased me from his life came crawling back for the one thing only I could give, and how I said, no, he didn't die. He didn't disappear in a tragic accident. He just stopped coming home. No note on the table, no sit-down conversation. Just one day the coat hook by the door was empty. His shoes weren't there, his toothbrush was gone, and there was a crisp white envelope on the kitchen counter, my name written in thick, sharp letters. Inside, a check. No words, no explanation, just numbers. I was 12, old enough to notice the silence, too young to understand why it hurt so much. Mom tried to cover for him, said he needed space, said adults go through things. But even at 12, I could read her eyes better than her words. She wasn't covering for him. She was trying to protect me from the truth. And the truth was simple. He chose someone else, not just a new partner, but a new life, a cleaner slate, one that didn't include the kid who reminded him of everything he didn't want to deal with. People talk about absent fathers like they fade, but mine was sharp, precise, surgical in how he cut me out. And when you're 12 and your own father ghosts you, you don't just lose a parent, you lose a piece of your reflection. They looked perfect, on screen anyway. Filtered smiles, coordinated outfits, a golden retriever with a holiday bow. The kind of family you'd scroll past and think, wow, must be nice. He had a new house in the suburbs, white picket fence, open concept kitchen, and a new son. Not just any son, the kind you frame on a mantle. Private school, baseball trophies. He even called him Buddy, the same name he used to call me. Every post was a little knife, a brunch photo, a birthday video. That time he posted #GirlDad with his stepdaughter, like I never existed. He didn't just move on. He replaced me, digitally, emotionally, completely. I used to keep screenshots, proof that I wasn't making it up, that he really did choose them, that he really did look happier. Mom never talked about it. She just worked double shifts and wore exhaustion like a uniform. I stopped showing her the posts. What was the point? It didn't make her feel better. It didn't make me feel seen. People always say, well, at least he's happy now. But no one ever asks what it feels like to be the thing someone had to leave to find that happiness. I was 12 when he left, 14 when I stopped checking his page, and 17 when I realized he didn't unfollow me. He just never followed me back. I didn't get a graduation trip, no car with a bow on top, no surprise acceptance letter TikTok moment. Just a financial aid packet and a reminder that rent was due on the 5th. While other kids were posting dorm room hauls and move-in vlogs, I was figuring out how many shifts at the coffee shop I could work between anatomy lectures. Community college wasn't plan B. It was the only plan. Because when your father forgets you exist, FAFSA doesn't. Every morning, I'd brew burnt espresso for people in Patagonia vests, typing on MacBooks their parents bought. And every night, I'd go home to a quiet apartment that smelled like books, stress, and leftover instant noodles. I wasn't bitter, at least not then. I told myself I was building character, grinding, doing it the right way, whatever that meant. But deep down, I was angry, not just because he left, but because he made me invisible. He had the resources to make this easy for me, and he chose not to. Sometimes, customers would come in with their teenage daughters, buy them oat milk lattes, ask about school, and I'd wonder what it would have felt like to be supported without needing to prove I was worth the effort. Instead, I memorized muscle groups on flashcards between shifts, spilled coffee on my nursing shoes, and kept my head down. Because if I couldn't be someone's daughter, maybe I could still become someone important. I didn't choose nephrology because it sounded glamorous. No one dreams of kidneys. They dream of hearts, brains, life-saving ER heroics. But I chose the organs no one thinks about, because that's how I felt most of my life. Overlooked, underappreciated, but quietly essential. Kidneys are funny. They don't scream when they're in trouble. They just fail, quietly, until one day everything crashes. I understood that kind of silence. So while everyone else chased prestige and surgical glory, I focused on what actually kept people alive. Filtration, balance, detox. It was all so poetic. I worked like my future depended on it, because it did. Late nights in the lab, practicing on simulation dummies until my hands ached. I wasn't the smartest in the room, but I was the one who never left it. Eventually, they noticed. Professors pulled me aside, told me I had something. Not just knowledge, discipline, stillness. I didn't celebrate. I just nodded, went back to studying. See, when you've spent your life being treated like a burden, you don't dream of praise. You dream of being useful. Not loved, not missed, just needed. And somewhere in the back of my mind, maybe I believed that if I became indispensable, the people who once left me behind would have no choice but to see me. It showed up on a Wednesday, right after a 12-hour shift. I was standing in my kitchen, peeling off gloves that smelled like sanitizer and sorrow, when my phone buzzed. Subject line, request for compatibility. Screening sender, his name. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a hospital admin had the wrong email. But no, he knew exactly where to find me. I opened it. It was 3 paragraphs long. No, hi. No, how have you been? Just facts. He was in renal failure. His son wasn't a match. I might be. There it was. After all these years, after birthdays skipped, diplomas ignored, and milestones met in silence, he needed something. Not a connection, not forgiveness, just a kidney. It was written like a business proposal. No emotion, no accountability. Just a desperate man asking for a favor from the daughter he'd deleted. I reread it 3 times, not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to feel something. Anger, sadness, vindication. But all I felt was hollow. Like I'd waited my whole life for some kind of closure, and instead got a clinical request to save the life of the man who never showed up in mine. There was no mention of the past, no explanation, just a quiet assumption that now that I was useful, I'd forget everything else, and maybe once I would have. But that girl was gone. They didn't wait long. 3 days after the email, I got a video message. Not from him, from her. The wife, the woman who used to post filtered brunch photos and Ash blessed captions, now sitting in what looked like a hospital chapel, eyes red, mascara streaked like war paint. She said my name softly, like we were old friends, like I didn't remember every photo she'd posted of their perfect little family without me in it. She called me strong, brilliant, kind, words I hadn't heard from my own blood in over a decade. Then came the ask. If there's any part of you that remembers the good times, please help him. The good times? You mean the years before I learned to stop hoping for a birthday card? Before he stopped showing up to school plays or responding to texts? I paused the video. Let it sit there, her face frozen mid-plea. A few hours later, a text came from the son, the golden child, the one with the trophies and the private school smile. He apologized, said he didn't know how bad it was between us, said he wished we could have grown up together, and maybe, in some other version of this life, we would have. But that version didn't exist. Because while they were building their memories, I was cleaning espresso machines and learning how to live invisible. And now they wanted me to be the miracle. The irony? They were asking for a piece of me, but they never bothered to know me. For years, I was the family's unspoken footnote, the forgotten daughter, the one who didn't fit the narrative. But now I was on their Facebook feed, front and center. They posted a photo of me from my hospital's website, white coat, arms crossed, confident smile, captioned, "Our brave girl, working in transplant medicine. Please keep us in your prayers." Suddenly, I was our girl. Suddenly, I was worthy of a prayer circle. The same people who couldn't be bothered to pronounce my name right at family gatherings were now tagging me in posts like we'd been close all along. People I hadn't heard from since middle school were commenting, "So proud of you, Doc." Sending strength and love. Love? Where was that love when I was applying for scholarships no one celebrated? Where was that pride when I graduated top of my class and got nothing but silence? I watched the posts rack up likes, shares, sympathy. They turned my career into a public relations campaign, not because they cared, but because they were desperate, and maybe they thought the attention would sway me, that the world seeing me as the selfless daughter would pressure me to play the part. But here's the thing. You don't get to abandon someone, erase them from your story, and then drag them back in when the plot twists against you. I didn't ask for a spotlight. I asked to be seen, years ago. Now they were finally looking. But it wasn't because they saw me. It was because they needed something. And this time, I wasn't the same girl who used to wait for them to show up. This time, I was already walking away. I didn't answer right away. I told them I needed time to think. But what I really needed was space to feel. Because it's easy to say no in theory. It's harder when your silence might cost someone their life, even if that someone never showed up in yours. I sat in my apartment, dim kitchen light, takeout on the counter, unopened mail stacking up, and let it all flood in. The birthdays that came and went. The voicemail I left when I got into med school. Never returned. The time I ran into him at a grocery store and he pretended not to notice. How do you weigh a life against a lifetime of absence? People love to say, be the bigger person. But they never talk about how heavy that role feels when you're the one who was made small for so long. I wanted to scream. Not because I was angry, but because I was tired. Tired of carrying the emotional weight for people who never picked up theirs, tired of pretending that forgiveness means forgetting. So I made a list. On one side, everything I owed him. On the other, everything he gave me. The first column was blank. And still, part of me wondered, if I gave him this second chance, would it rewrite the first chapter? Would he see me as something more than just medically convenient? But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a redemption arc. It was a transaction. And I had to decide, was I willing to trade another piece of myself to fix what he broke? Or was I finally allowed to say no and mean it? I did it in silence. No announcement, no update, no hint that I was even considering it. I just walked into the lab, gave them my information, and rolled up my sleeve. The nurse made small talk about the weather. I just nodded, watching the vial fill with my blood. Dark, warm, unbothered. I wasn't scared. I'd done this before, dozens of times, for strangers. But this wasn't medicine. This was memory. This was history in a plastic tube. A few days later, the results came in. I was a match. Of course I was. Because life loves irony, and blood doesn't care about abandonment. I stared at the report like it was some kind of betrayal. Like my own body had sided with him. You grow up believing that if someone hurt you enough, it would somehow change your chemistry. That being forgotten, unloved, left out, would show up in your cells. But here I was, compatible, biologically perfect, emotionally wrecked. They say organ donation is the ultimate gift, the purest form of love. But what if the person asking never gave you anything worth loving? I sat there with the file in my hand, not feeling heroic, not feeling angry, just tired. Because this wasn't just about saving a life. It was about deciding, once and for all, if I still owed anything to the man who taught me how it felt to be disposable. I didn't call him, didn't reply to the email, didn't answer the texts that started coming in like a slow drip of desperation. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the blog I hadn't touched since med school, and I started typing. The title was simple, I am not your backup plan. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was the kind of quiet truth that makes people shift in their seats. I wrote about being 12 and watching a father leave without a word, about sitting in cheap cafeteria chairs while other kids got picked up by dads in suits, about birthdays spent refreshing an inbox that stayed empty. I wrote about the years I spent trying to prove I was worth returning to, and the brutal freedom of realizing that some people don't come back because they never intended to. I shared what it felt like to grow up invisible, to build a life from scratch, to become impressive only after I became useful. Then I told them about the test results, how I was a match, how I could biologically be his answer, but emotionally, I was done being the afterthought. I ended it with this. Being related to someone doesn't mean you owe them pieces of yourself. Sometimes blood is just biology, and forgiveness isn't always an invitation. It's a release. I hit publish. It didn't go viral, but it didn't have to. It reached the people it was meant for. And more importantly, it reached me. Because for the first time, I wasn't writing to be heard. I was writing to let go. He could beg. They could spin it. The internet could whisper. But my truth was out there, unapologetic and untouchable. And no matter what they said next, they'd never again be able to say I stayed silent. They called one last time. I let it ring, not out of cruelty, but because some things deserve silence more than they deserve closure. I didn't ghost them. I sent an official letter to the hospital, professionally worded, medically sound. It said I was opting out. No explanation, no drama, just declined to proceed. A clean number. It was the kind of decision people assume comes with a heavy heart, but mine had never felt lighter. I didn't walk into that hospital room, didn't watch him hooked up to machines, didn't sit there pretending we had a bond just because we shared DNA. Instead, I took a walk. It was cold that day. Sky the color of wet concrete, wind biting like regret. I remember passing a family outside the hospital, a father lifting his kid onto his shoulders, laughing so loud it cut through the gray. And for a split second, I wondered what it might have felt like to be that kid. But I didn't dwell. I just kept walking. Because I had finally made peace with something people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. That not every story ends with forgiveness. Not every wound gets stitched. And not every parent earns redemption just because time passed. People asked later if I felt guilty, if I lost sleep, if I regretted letting him go. And I told them the truth. You can't regret something that was never yours to carry. He had years, decades, to show up, and he didn't. But I did. I showed up for myself, for the girl who waited, for the woman who built a life from the ruins of someone else's decision. And when I said no, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't resentment. It was reclamation. Not of his life, but of mine. The internet has a short memory, but families with wounded pride, not so much. A week after I published the letter, the whispers started turning into noise. There were posts, passive-aggressive at first, quotes about honor and duty, Bible verses about forgiveness, comments not tagged to me, but written for me. Then came the public response. The wife posted a photo of him in the hospital bed, eyes sunken, wires everywhere. Captioned, "Still holding on. We're heartbroken, but hopeful." Hashtag, "Some people have no heart." And just like that, I was the villain. Not because I lied, not because I harmed, but because I didn't play the role they scripted for me. Sympathy is funny. It goes to the loudest crier, not the quietest survivor. People messaged me saying I'd regret this forever, that no matter what happened between us, he was still my father. But see, that's the thing. He was only a father by biology, and biology doesn't entitle you to my body. I didn't respond, not once, not to the texts, not to the threads, not to the pressure. Because silence was never the absence of feeling. It was my boundary, my dignity, my final word in a conversation I never got to speak in, growing up. So I let them spiral, let them say whatever they needed to say to make sense of it all. Because I wasn't looking for revenge. I was busy looking for peace. And for the first time in my life, I could feel it coming. I moved, not far, just enough to breathe different air. A quieter town. No echoes of familiar last names. No unexpected run-ins in parking lots. Just clean sidewalks, slower days, and the kind of silence that doesn't press against your chest. I took a position at a small community clinic. No prestige, no plaques, just people who needed help and didn't care where I went to school. Didn't ask about my last name. Didn't expect a backstory. Most days, I walked to work, past the same bakery with fogged-up windows. Nodded at the mailman who whistled 80s tunes. Stopped by the corner store where the owner always threw in an extra granola bar for the hero in Scrubs. No one knew what I'd said no to, what I'd walked away from. They only knew how I showed up now, present, calm, whole. One afternoon, a little girl came into the clinic with her mom, scared, pale, needing dialysis. She looked at me like I was magic. I sat beside her, explained everything slowly. Let her hold my stethoscope, told her kidneys were quiet, but powerful. She smiled, and something in my chest finally unlocked. I wasn't the daughter who wasn't chosen. I wasn't the woman who said no. I was just me, still standing, still helping, still here, and without them, without the noise, the begging, the wait, I wasn't empty. I was free. There was a box I hadn't opened in years. Cardboard, faded corners, tucked at the back of my closet like a ghost too polite to haunt me. Inside were fragments, old school photos, report cards, a letter I wrote to him but never sent, and the envelope. That envelope, the first and last thing he ever gave me. White, rigid, with my name scrawled in thick black ink. Inside, a check. No note, no explanation, just a transaction dressed like care. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe back then, it felt like proof that he was real, that I hadn't imagined the loss. But now, holding it in my hands again, all I could think was, this isn't a memory, it's a weight, and I've carried it long enough. So I lit a match. Not out of rage, not for drama, just clarity. The paper curled like dry leaves. The ink vanished into flame, and the silence afterward felt holy. We talk about memory like it's fixed, like it's a shelf we have no choice but to dust. But sometimes memory is a choice, and I was done choosing pain. I didn't need to remember him through absence, didn't need to define myself through what he never gave. There were better things to hold now. The soft sound of a child's laugh in the clinic, the quiet pride in knowing I built something from nothing, the peace in knowing I didn't owe anyone my story. But I told it anyway. Letting go isn't forgetting, it's just making room. Room for the life I chose. For the version of me that no longer flinched at birthdays or hospitals or the sound of his name. The fire was small, contained, but when it burned through that envelope, it felt like the first time I ever got to say, I choose me. I wrote a letter, not to him, to her, the version of me that used to wait at the window. That 12-year-old girl with a backpack too big and a heart too open. I wrote it like I would have spoken to her if I could go back. If I could kneel beside her after he left and tell her the truth before the world tried to rewrite it. I said, you didn't break him. You weren't too much or too hard to love. You were just the inconvenient truth he didn't have the courage to face. And I'm sorry it took this long. But we made it. I told her about the woman she'd become, how she'd learned to heal strangers, even when she hadn't fully healed herself, how she'd build her own definition of family, one patient, one choice, one boundary at a time. I told her that closure wouldn't come with an apology or a perfect ending. It would come in whispers, in the way her voice stopped shaking when she said no, in the way she stopped hoping for people to come back, in the way she finally felt whole, without needing someone else to say she mattered. And then I folded the letter. No address, no stamp, just tucked it away in a drawer meant for things I no longer needed to carry every day. Because closure doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own breath in a quiet room where no one else is talking over you. I didn't write to be heard. I wrote to finally listen to myself. And in that stillness, I realized the girl I had been, she never stopped waiting for love. But the woman I am now, she doesn't wait anymore. She walks forward with peace in her pocket, and no one left to prove anything to. I used to think I'd be a parent someday, not because I felt ready, but because I thought that's what healing looked like, proving I could give what I never got. But healing, I've learned, isn't about recreating the past with a better outcome. It's about deciding what ends with you. There's a kind of grief that lives in the absence. The hugs you didn't get, the birthdays you didn't celebrate, the apologies that never came. And for a while, I thought I could outrun it by becoming better, becoming useful, becoming enough. But you don't outrun a wound by dressing it in accomplishments. You sit with it, you name it. And then, if you're lucky, you let it go. I don't know if I'll ever have a child. And if I do, it won't be to fix anything. It'll be because I have something whole to give, not because I'm still trying to fill what was taken. I won't teach them that love has to be earned, that silence means safety, that biology guarantees belonging. I'll teach them that worth isn't conditional, that family is a verb, not a bloodline. Because the pattern of abandonment ends here, with me, not as revenge, but as redemption. Not for them, for the girl I used to be, for every version of me that refused to disappear quietly. Not every story ends with a hug. Some end with peace. And sometimes, peace is the braver choice. If you've ever been the one who stayed quiet, who carried the silence, the guilt, the invisible weight, this story is for you. Because there's power in not performing. There's strength in walking away without slamming the door. And there's healing in knowing you don't owe anyone your pain just because you share a name. I didn't tell this story to be pitied. I told it because someone out there needs to hear. You don't have to bleed to prove you're good. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to be loved. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is choose yourself in a room full of people who taught you not to. And if that's you, if you've ever stood at the edge of obligation and quietly said no, I hope you know how strong that makes you. So if this resonated with you, if it cracked something open or helped you close a chapter of your own, leave a comment, tell your truth, even if it's messy, even if it's quiet, because your story deserves a voice, even if it shakes. And if you want more stories like this, raw, unfiltered, not wrapped in neat bows, subscribe, stick around. We don't do perfect here, but we do real. And sometimes that's more than enough.